Greetings, travellers, and if you'd like to quickly get off the bus and make your way into the Gilman House, because, as you can see, quite unusually for the time of year, we have deep snow in Innsmouth, and it's a bit nippy. I'm one of your guides, Rob Poyton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. Yes, there is a chill wind, and I can only assume it's something to do with the fact that we are being joined today by another esteemed guest, writer of, I guess you'd call it polar ghost stories and all kinds of other Arctic weirdness, Ally Wilkes. So shall we go up and meet her?
Yes, follow us through the lobby. I think Mr. Gilman has put some little tots of rum on the bar for us there, just to warm us up on our way, just to warm our spirits.
Ooh.
And here we are at room 428. And here's our guest for today, Ally Wilkes. Hi, Ally. How are you doing?
Hello. Thank you very much for having me here. I can't wait to learn about this beautiful town with its quaint customs and, of course, its charming architecture.
Yes, those gable roofs, though, they're sagging a bit under the snow at the moment, I think. I take it then this is your first visit to Innsmouth.
It is, and you needn't worry about the roofs. I'm actually 5'0", so there are going to be no bumped heads on my watch.
Excellent. So, as Tim mentioned at the start there, we have two excellent and chilling, Antarctic and Arctic novels to talk about. But perhaps before we get into that, you could tell us something about your background and how you got into weird fiction.
Sure. Well, I live in London. I'm a British writer of weird fiction and ghost stories. My background really is that I was an extremely spooky kid. I was very much brought up on the Usborne Book of Ghost Stories, progressed on to Ramsey Campbell and Point Horror, and then just ran with it from there. So I've always had an interest in the strange and macabre. My nickname at school was Spooky.
Nice.
I did, however, take a bit of a swerve in that I trained as a lawyer and spent 11 years working as a criminal barrister in London and the Southeast. So going out to court pretty much every day, conducting trials and all other types of hearing. Yes, I did wear the hilarious wig. Yes, it was extremely itchy and expensive is all I can say about that.
You knew I was going to ask.
Did you ever work at Snaresbrook Crown Court? Were you ever there?
Yes. Oh, Snaresbrook holds a particular low place in my heart. It is one of the most dilapidated buildings in the London court estate. It looks gorgeous from the outside, obviously former boys' home. It's got a gorgeous little chapel inside it, lots of nooks and crannies. The cells are quite interesting, but oh my God, the robing rooms and the courtrooms themselves. I mean, talk about eldritch horrors.
Yeah, I worked there for a couple of years. I worked for the CPS, and
wow.
Yeah, there's some very creepy old corridors up in the top bit that you occasionally had to go to the archives. Yeah, quite a strange old building.
Funnily enough, we may well have crossed paths then, because I started off doing mostly defence work, and by the time I left my practice, I had moved, I think, to doing mostly prosecution work. That was just how it panned out.
Wow.
But I found that the life of a barrister wasn't really for me, and so I took a big sideways swing and thought, it's now or never. Here is the time to start writing. So I went on a 6-month novel writing course, developed my debut novel, and was very, very, very fortunate to snap up an agent almost immediately and then get a book deal. So I've been running with this strange, new and uncanny lifestyle ever since.
The writer's lifestyle, you're sort of getting up what time you want and generally lounging around.
Yes, that's exactly how it is. You know, the chaise longue, eating bonbons. You know, that's exactly everything you've got in mind.
Yeah, spending a lot of time on YouTube doing research and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, research and inverted commas. That's what kind of most of my life is. It's just another word for procrastination, right?
Listen, there is nothing wrong with research. The thing I always tell new or aspiring authors is you absolutely have to pick as your topic for a book something you are absolutely feral about, or something you desperately want to know absolutely everything about, because that's the only way you'll survive. You'll only survive that sort of deep dive and the immersion and the time and willpower it takes of writing a book if it's something where your genuine attitude is another 6 hours on Wikipedia. Hooray!
Yes. Yeah, because I've had that nightmare, because I've taken a lot of, like, where I've been commissioned to do stories for anthologies and things like that, and it's been about a subject that I don't really care about, or it's a topic I'm not really into, and I'm like, oh, it's fine, it's only like 5,000 words, I can just rattle that off. No, 2,000 words into it, I'm just like, I just want the world to open up and swallow me whole. I'm just like, I'm really not into this at all.
Yeah. I'm very trenchant about. I started off obviously writing short stories and submitting them to ye old slush piles like everyone does.
Yes.
Luckily, these days I'm getting a lot more commissions for anthologies, which I really love.
Oh, cool.
But people have been very good at tailoring them to my interests. So this year I'm doing a lot of short stories about witchcraft. I've got a short story I'm doing about British folklore, specifically the folklore of Shropshire, which is where my family is from.
Oh, that's interesting. My family's from Shropshire as well.
Wow.
Yeah, Bridgenorth area.
Oh, see, we were originally in Chatwall, which is near Church Stretton up in the Carding Mill Valley.
Yes, I know it. Yeah.
And I've just been invited to do what I think is a really intriguing anthology, which is going to be rewriting versions of the Green Book from Markham's The White People.
Oh,
nice.
Wow.
Oh,
so
that's very
you couldn't
cool.
pick anything more targeted towards my interests, because I really, really love all those old British authors of cosmic horror, you know, Blackwood, Markham, the entire Golden Dawn set, in fact.
Yeah.
And I think, Lovecraft is often called the father of weird horror or cosmic horror, but there is a tradition, particularly here, as you mentioned, that goes back the preceding century, really, isn't there?
Absolutely. There's so much out there. And I think one of the things that I love to discover is the British Library Tales of the Weird books, which are this gorgeously produced little anthology series, often themed around a particular idea or a particular author. And they are digging out stuff from the archives, which really proves that sort of genesis of cosmic and weird fiction is a lot older than we think it is. And people were having very sort of Lovecraftian ideas even before he came on the scene.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've been collecting them myself. In fact, we delved into one of them a while ago, didn't we? Was it Women of the Weird?
Yes, Leonora Carrington, was it, I think?
Yes, that was it.
Was it Weird? Yes, Women of the Weird, the one that was Women of Weird Tales.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that was great. I loved the one about the mole man. That was just...
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh, so disturbing.
Oh, yeah. And there's another publisher, Handheld Press, who I've had the pleasure of sharing a trader's room with on numerous occasions at conventions. And they've done a similar thing, like with mainly collections of female authors of weird fiction.
Mm-hmm.
There's several anthologies, and then they've been digging out like things by like people like Edith Wharton and E. Nesbit, and re-releasing this stuff that's basically been lost for decades and decades. You know, it's really good stuff. Yeah,
they pulled out some books by Sylvia Townsend Warner, who obviously most of us know through Lolly Willows, but actually she's got a very interesting back catalogue. Sadly, I think Handheld is no longer putting out books. I remember a very sad sale at one point, I think maybe last year, which is a shame because, as you say, they were doing amazing things in anthologies. But of course, I think some of the editors of anthologies that they were using are now releasing more stuff through British Library Tales of the Weird. I know Katie Saw is, because she's got a new one out about ancient gods, which I can't wait to read.
No, yeah. Excellent.
So let's move on to your debut novel and then the second novel, All the White Spaces and Where the Dead Wait, both set or based around polar expeditions, Arctic and Antarctic. I wanted to ask you about the setting, first of all. What is it that attracts you to that setting in particular?
Well, I'm not so sure it's specifically the setting as the fact that I absolutely love survival horror. Um, my sort of favorite gruesome stuff growing up was things to do with things like survival cannibalism, the Uruguayan flight disaster, all that sort of stuff. I was a very, very grisly child.
Yeah.
And I just love the idea of these big places in the earth, which for those who are unprepared and those who are not from those locales, they might as well be a black hole that you drop down. You go off the edge of the map and there you are. And you are forced back on your own resources. So I like them as a setting for survival horror, but also I have to admit to a real fondness for the exploration literature of around the late 1800s to early 1900s. Scott, Shackleton, all of those guys. There's just such an incredible wealth of writing, and a lot of it is very, very spooky and very, very weird. I've written an article which I think is electric literature about encounters with the unseen in Antarctica, right, which establishes that explorers right back from the word go have been experiencing Antarctica as an eldritch or uncanny sort of location even before Lovecraft got in there.
Yeah, because I think Edmund Hillary and Shackleton all spoke about being followed and feeling a presence and all that, extra member in the party and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, it's classic third man syndrome, which of course had third man syndrome. The genesis of that was Shackleton's experience in South Georgia, which then made its way into T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. So it's got quite a pedigree, but even before then, people were noticing that in Antarctica, the elements and the landscape seem to be alive and hostile to human influence. And that's a very sort of Blackwood, that's a very Algernon Blackwood type idea. So I obviously wanted to play with it, the idea of the sentient landscape or the unwelcoming landscape.
Yeah.
It strikes me it's almost like an alien landscape on Earth, and in some ways, when you look at some sci-fi films like Alien, that could almost be the same setting, but it's something we have here and is accessible. Although I often think, they say if you climb Everest now, it's like there's a hamburger stand halfway up, and there also sadly the remains of other people there, right? It's almost like a tourist place, yet the polar regions, as far as I know, still seem to be relatively unspoiled. Is that true, do you think? Or is there a burgeoning tourist industry going on?
From what I've seen, certainly in Antarctica, if there is a tourist industry, it's largely concentrated around the peninsula. The actual interior of the continent is wildly inhospitable and tends to be scientists and military only. Right. Although you've mentioned... I can't pass it up. You've mentioned Alien now, and I am a huge stan. I will defend all day Alien versus Predator, the movie.
So will I. I think it's great.
Science fiction action film set in Antarctica that actually touches on a lot of the same preoccupations as At the Mountains of Madness. Mm-hmm. I think you can actually draw quite a straight line from all of the glyphs, the underground tunnels, the remnants of ancient civilizations, the geo and bioengineering. You can draw a straight line from all of that in Mountains of Madness to Alien versus Predator, the film. And I will go to bat for it.
I was convinced when I watched it, because I remember thinking to myself, they have to have read Mountains of Madness.
Yeah.
They have to. Yeah, because it's just like, hang on a minute. I was expecting albino penguins to come shuffling out of one of the side tunnels at one point.
Absolutely. It's such a fun core text. And I have to confess that when I'm in the mood for a little sort of light and easy watching, I do admit to watching Ancient Aliens. So obviously, Alien versus Predator has got that sticky fingerprint all over it, hasn't it?
There is an attraction to that stuff, isn't there? But I mean, even that goes back to like your Hollow Earth theory and all that kind of thing.
Oh yeah,
which I gather was one of the prompts for one of the first big expeditions down there, the US expedition.
Well, there were lots of people were obsessed with the Hollow Earth theory. It dates back to a guy in the 1800s called Joseph Sims, who published a book, a pamphlet, and then a book, I think, about what he called Sims holes, which are the holes into the interior of the Earth, and he posited one at the top and one at the bottom, etc. So there have been all sorts of sort of apocryphal expeditions to try and find these Sims holes. And I think the wildest bit of polar conspiracy is the idea that Admiral Byrd, who was the first flight over one of the poles, actually went into a Sims hole, found the tropical paradise at the centre of the Earth, etc., met with its inhabitants, and came out and wrote this absolutely bonkers diary about it.
It has been a setting for weird fiction right back as well. I suppose Poe and Arthur Pym was one of the first, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Just last episode, we were covering a William Hope Hodgson story. Who I don't think he ever made it that far, but he was certainly at sea for 12 years or something, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was writing so much seafaring stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, he's one of the greats of that genre. And of course, the two novels I have out both deal with sort of seafaring and bad things happening on ships. So you've got to love a bit of William Hope Hodgson.
Oh, yeah.
I never realised as well that Conan Doyle was a surgeon on a whaler.
Mm.
He had direct experience.
He did that as research, partly, I think, for his absolute masterpiece, which is the short story, The Captain of the Pole Star.
Yes.
Which is just such a creepy piece of Arctic fiction. It's about a whaling ship stuck in the ice, and there are apparitions starting to appear to the captain and so on. It's an absolutely incredible piece of weird fiction. I love all of his slightly more off the wall stuff, like the Black Panther story and Lot 249 and all of that.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Because a lot of people, obviously they're known for Sherlock Holmes, a lot of people aren't aware that he wrote some absolutely fantastic weird fiction.
Yeah.
And, because, I mean, I wasn't as aware until relatively recently. I think it was through the British Library of the Weird Stuff, that there was so much of it. I'd read bits and pieces, but I've since done a deep dive into it. And yeah, and the ones you mentioned there are absolutely tremendous.
Mm.
I wonder though, do you not think Holmes on occasions kind of touches on weird fiction almost, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, but it turns out, well, it's kind of like Karnaki, right? In that respect, the Karnaki ones that turn out that they're not actually supernatural; it's somebody faking it. You know, it's all a bit Scooby Doo. So I guess you have that, don't you? With like the Sussex vampire and things like that, and Hound of the Baskervilles and things like that.
So you've got that setting, and I suppose the time is kind of part of the setting as well. One thing that always amazes me with these people back then, they went to this place dressed in tweed and woolen hats, and it just seems incredible. I mean, how they must have had some knowledge of what they were going into, but I guess they were going with the technology of the time. Was there a bit of a colonial attitude, do you think, they're going on? Because obviously there are people who inhabit these areas. Are they sort of ignored in those expeditions?
Yes, I think there's a massive colonial aspect to it, certainly in the Arctic expeditions. Circling back to what you were saying about clothing, it's interesting that the history of exploration of the Arctic by white settlers is less modern. So those were the people who went out, as we've all seen in The Terror, wearing their sort of woolen greatcoats and their silly hats, and then being utterly surprised when they froze to death. But the history of exploration of the Antarctic, which of course has no indigenous population, is more modern. So we're talking more late 1800s. So people were a bit more prepared. You've got these amazing expeditionary clothes. all these old-fashioned brands used to equip the expeditions. So people would wear their Burberry one pieces, which would be essentially like combination underwear, and a Burberry Mac jacket over the top. And there was Jaeger woolens and things like that. They were actually reasonably well prepared in the Antarctic, but I think that's as a result of it coming much later.
Nice.
What does strike me always is that these expeditions, certainly the ones I write about, come before there was a widespread understanding of how to prevent scurvy, and before the idea of vitamin C had ever been isolated, I think.
All right.
The history of scurvy is a fascinating topic in itself, but notable is the fact that people kept on discovering ways to prevent scurvy and then promptly forgetting them 20 years later. Poor institutional memory, more or less. But I do think the history of exploration, in inverted commas, of the Arctic has got a massive colonial aspect to it. The attitudes towards the indigenous inhabitants were often very, very dismissive and often deeply, deeply cruel. You have some expeditions which actually brought back Inupiaq people to New York to serve as a sort of living exhibit, which is absolutely disgusting.
Wow.
And you have all of these problems caused by, well, we know the problems caused by first contact being played out in these areas which are very much living on a communication with nature subsistence basis. When you introduce a whole ship of, say, 100 extra people to that, there are bound to be all sorts of problems. So one of the things I was really keen to reflect sort of in microcosm in my second novel was the experience of Inuit contact, and also a smidgen of the colonial history of Greenland, where some of it is set.
I think in a sense it's like this, Christopher Columbus discovering America, right? It's, hello,
Yeah. Yes.
We've just found you.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many places in the Arctic in particular that are named after obscure members of the Admiralty or their wives or various kings and queens. It's bonkers. It's bonkers.
And was a lot of this driven by trade, looking for trade routes like the North-East Passage and all that kind of thing?
Absolutely. When it comes to the Arctic, the Holy Grails were, of course, the Northwest Passage, which is Franklin's little project, and the Northeast Passage as well, which is less discussed, but claimed certainly a similarly dramatic number of ships and men over the years. So it was the concept that whoever controlled faster trade routes would obviously be able to either preserve or break Britain's trade monopoly. And one idea that they had floating around back then, no pun intended, was this idea of the open polar sea. Scientists of the time had convinced a lot of people that once you got up to the Arctic, near the pole, it would be a balmy, tropical, still sea, free of ice that you could go through at any point. Maybe there was an outer ring of ice you need to smash through. Once you got to the top, it would all be absolutely fine because ice can't form far from land. And they looked at the existence of these open water areas, and they looked at migration patterns, and they all theorized this balmy open polar sea, which of course doesn't actually exist. And I had great fun in my second novel, sort of playing off ideas of that, and also making the open polar sea a sort of very eldritch and very weird location that you could perhaps glimpse out of the corner of your eye, but certainly not to be trusted.
Yeah, it very much has that sense of, well, the Mountains of Madness, where there's this, it's always just beyond the next mountain range. There's possibly this something.
The plateau.
Yeah.
Relatively recently, I stumbled across a documentary, and it was about one of these. It was about one of these doomed expeditions through one of the passages, and that was kind of the whole thing all the way through it, from the logs and all the stuff that has been recovered. And it was just like, yes, we'll find it in the next few days. Yes, we'll find it in the next few days. crap, we're kind of it's all frozen and we're stuck and we can't do anything. And then it's just this slow descent into madness, really. And that's incredibly Mountains of Madness, really, when you think about it. But it's back to that whole thing of truth being stranger than fiction in a way. It's just how deluded these people were by journals and things at the time, telling us that there's this utopia just over the hill. But nope.
Yeah, it really is. I think one of the most prominent searchers for that open polar sea who went really quite high up into the Arctic was a man called Elisha Kent Kane, who was an American explorer. And he was famous for having married in secret Maggie Fox of the Fox sisters. So one of the earliest progenitors of spiritualism, spirit rapping, and mediumship, which I found such an intriguing connection. The idea that these two people are each in their own way exploring the very boundaries of where humans can go.
And that, to me, that resulted in one of the most chilling scenes. So you've got an abandoned ship. This is in Where the Dead Wait, right? Abandoned ships to me are always really creepy for some reason. I don't know why. But then you have a seance as well.
Nice.
I can't think of anything worse.
It's a horrible idea, a seance on one of these horrible abandoned ice-locked ships. But actually, strangely enough, a lot of Arctic explorers who did have an anthropological bent often invited the local peoples and their shamans onto the ship and actually conducted seances or spirit viewing or spirit contacting ceremonies according to the local beliefs.
Wow.
So there was definitely a precedent for that sort of thing happening. I just stirred the spiritualist pot a little bit because I think your classic spiritualist seance has got a special place in the heart of all spooky people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's an incredibly Hope Hodgson concept right there, isn't it? An abandoned ship, a seance on it, some kind of mushroom monster will appear at some point. Either that or a giant tentacle,
That was the other nice thing I was going to say, especially with all the white spaces, which is this feeling of a presence, very much so. But there's kind of something there, but is there? It's never really, in the best weird fiction tradition, it's very much that growing atmosphere of dread of something that might be happening. So, I don't know, you mentioned Ramsey Campbell earlier. Obviously, he was a master of that genre. Was that an influence? How did you develop that idea?
I think for me, what you don't see on page is sometimes scarier. It comes back to the fear of the unknown. And a lot, I think, comes back to the fear of uncertainty. Once you can definitely see, categorize, or know the rules for the monster, particularly in horror fiction, for me, the monster loses a lot of its bite. I like to keep things slightly ambiguous and more in the sort of unspoken territory. And of course, that fit really well with the themes of both my books, because All the White Spaces is at its heart a book about post-World War I grief, which is which is all a very sort of nebulous, haunting, sort of the battlefields are ever present sort of weird idea. And then in Where the Dead Wait, it's about guilt. It's about a survivor of awful cannibal atrocities coming back to the real world and having to deal with what he did. So I like the idea that people can be haunted by their own actions or a concept at the same time as experiencing sort of this field of the uncanny generated by the place they're in.
Yeah, I think what you said there about the unknown being more terrifying than anything being sort of quantifiable. I think Algernon Blackwood's The Willows is the prime example for me.
Perfect. Yeah,
it's the prime example because nothing is explained, nothing is really seen. It's all just concepts and ideas. This kind of, But I think that's one of the most terrifying things ever written.
Oh, it's so frightening, isn't it? Those like strange little dent marks that appear in the man otter, and
and the little pitter patter on the roof of the tent and all that, the little things.
Oh, it's very, very frightening, and I think Blackwood does that sort of thing very, very well. I was recently at Oxford Literary Festival on a panel with Michelle Paver, who obviously writes exceptional books like Dark Matter and Thin Air. And we had a lot of fun discussing how we both take inspiration from Blackwood. She takes inspiration from sort of his classic ghost stories like the Kit Bag and things like that, which you can see. Obviously, in Thin Air, you can see the kit bag taken up the Himalayas. And I'm more into sort of The Man Who the Trees Loved and all the sort of more creeping sort of nature horrors. I actually live within walking distance of Blackwood's birthplace in Shooter's Hill. Whenever I want to get my Blackwood on, there's a gorgeous place called Oxley's Woods, which is like Ice Age woodland at the edge of London. So I can go and have a good old poke around in there and think, this is the sort of thing that he must have taken inspiration from.
Nice.
And you mentioned World War One there, which obviously looms large in all the white spaces. Because the central character lost both their brothers, right? And part of it is this sort of quest to honour their memory, I guess, because they very much wanted to go on that sort of expedition. And also the other thing is, would it be fair to say it's a trans character?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. Jonathan Morgan, my protagonist, is a trans man. The book isn't about him realizing that he's trans or that he's a man. The book is very much about what sort of man he's going to be, and that feeds into that post-World War I masculinity thing, which I always think is fascinating. It was possibly the first mass trauma event in the British consciousness, and I think it's fascinating to see what new and different models of masculinity emerged out of it, with the concepts of things like, for example, shell shock, the idea of psychiatric injury, which was not really thought about before then.
Yeah.
It was, someone once described to me as you'd be stamped with LMF, lack of moral fibre, for unfortunate people undergoing that sort of trauma.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, they were very, very cruel. And I don't think Britain had worked out its sort of feelings about its colonial legacy by then. And also you have the uptick in supernatural belief as part of the as part of the war. You've got I read Owen Davies' amazing book about the supernatural war, because you've got things coming into it like the boom of spiritualism, and also it was Arthur Machen who wrote The Angel of Mons and gave rise to the story of the Angel of Mons appearing over the battlefield. So again, you've got those Golden Dawn boys, they're at it again.
I'm sure it wasn't Uncle Alistair in America at the time, wasn't he, supposedly spying for the Germans or something?
He was in America spewing pro-German and anti-British propaganda. I'm glad you mentioned Crowley, because I'm working on my fourth novel at the moment, which is it's sort of based on a Crowley-like character, and means I get to read all the books about Crowley I could ever want, as well as spending far too much time at the British Museum.
Nice.
I actually did a Crowley walk around Brighton a couple of years ago.
Oh, amazing.
And he was cremated at Brighton Crematorium, and him and a lot of his cronies used to hang out in the cemetery there, and they were always mentioning the tomb of the White Horse and things like that. Now, at the time that he was cremated, the church held a white mass at St. Peter's Church in Brighton to counteract the final ritual, because that's what they dubbed this, Crowley's send-off, the final ritual and all that. And you got Chankbury Ring just up here, which is an incredibly creepy place where they used to hang out. And there's a pub in the lanes where in the guest book you've got Crowley, but you've also got people like Donstan Stevenson and people like that in there, who was also a Jack the Ripper suspect at one point. So yeah, it's all very, very interesting once you get delving into the Crowley. So yeah, Crowley's found his way into some of my stuff just by osmosis, really.
It pops up in pretty much everything, doesn't it, at some point or another? So let's zoom forward to the 1980s, shall we? So I believe Jamie Hallow and the End of the World is the setting. This is a Lovecraftian novella.
It is. I'm not sure it's 1980s and anything but the cover. So a few years ago, I started wanting to write more short and shorter fiction, and I had what I thought was a banging idea for a YA influenced novella that was very explicitly Lovecraftian. And I called it Jamie Hallow and the End of the World. It was picked up by Cemetery Gates Media, and the cover is just an absolute lush neon riot of a designed by Ben Baldwin, and it's one of the most 80s and adult goosebumps books you could ever want. But what really inspired me to write that was, it's very odd because most of my novels come to me as a series of ideas that I then sort of mush together. So I want to write about masculinity and Antarctica and ghosts in the World War I, and I put it all together. But this one came to me purely as a line, and I decided I had to write the book that went with that line. So the line is this: no one goes outside anymore. It's not the nuclear winter or the fallouts or the bands of surface scavengers, those who'd survived the bomb. It's the Shoggoths.
Oh,
nice. Oh, I'm hooked already. That's perfect.
Marvelous.
The idea is that we find ourselves in a bunker run by a mad Lovecraftian cult that has had thousands of years of keeping the eldritch terrors down. But in a nuclear winter and post-nuclear apocalypse, all the safeguards have gone off. And so not only do you have nuclear fallout, you have the Mygo coming to plunder planet Earth, you have Shoggoths rolling around out there, and a very nasty plan by the high priests and the hires up in the bunker as to what the future of the rest of humanity will be.
Oh,
perfect.
Is this going to be part of a series, do you think? Are you going to extend this out?
Oh, I would love it to be part of a series. People, please buy it. If you buy it, it could become part of a series. If you don't buy it, it will not.
There you go. There you go, folks.
Simple as that. But I can attest, it's a really gorgeous looking book. It's had very, very kind and good reviews from people I really respect. And it is as full on in the Lovecraftian mythos as I have ever been.
Yeah, Cemetery Gates do some good books. I think I've been in one of their anthologies back in a few years ago. I can't remember off the top of my head which one it was, but yeah, I often see their books pop up, and they're always very nicely designed, aren't they? Very eye-catching.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I mean, there's so many sort of independent publishers out there at the moment that a lot of the covers, you end up seeing recycling of the same stock images and things like this, right? And so it's nice when you see something that's very bespoke.
Brand new, I know. Speaking of covers, I spent a lot of today before coming on air designing covers for some chapbooks that I'm going to be putting out, containing 3 or 4 of my old short stories, collecting harder to find short stories, and sort of arranging them into thematic chapbooks. So I too know the pain of the Kindle cover creator.
Oh, it's a nightmare, isn't it?
One I'm holding is London Weird, which I'll be bringing along to Innsmouth Literary Festival to sell.
Oh, brilliant. We like a good London book.
Yes.
Well, for some reason, I seem to be really preoccupied with the London property market as being just an uncanny pit of eldritch terrors. And also the interchange beneath Bank Monument Station. I mean, I hate it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the London Underground in general is quite a rich place, right, for all sorts of weird goings on and what have you.
I mean, talk about non-Euclidean geometry. You just can't get out of some of those interchanges.
Oh, it's a nightmare. I've often said that Niall Athertep is manifested. He would either be a politician or an estate agent.
I just started reading a book about Hawksmoor as well. That's very interesting.
Ah, nice.
I didn't know, because I think he built, I think it was 5 churches, but apparently there were plans for a lot more. And it was, they say, going to reveal this vast occult shape or sigil.
Lovely. Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of that, wasn't there? And especially when people were delving into Jack the Ripper, they were finding patterns where there wasn't patterns, but maybe there was. Maybe there was all along.
I love an occult maybe conspiracy.
No.
Bring it on.
Good fun, isn't it?
Plot it on a map. What does it make? It makes a pentagram, or maybe it makes a circle. Say which one it is.
That was exactly it. And people were adding victims and taking victims away from it and things like that to make it work. But it was fascinating studies. Like there's loads of books on that. The black magic rites of Jack the Ripper and all this kind of stuff. They're fascinating to read because they obviously have all the Golden Dawn collections. So it's probably something you'd be interested in.
So Mr. Lovecraft seems to be increasing in popularity, ever expanding like a shoggoth. I presume then that there's sort of younger people coming into Lovecraft as well. What do you think that's through the films or gaming or that kind of stuff? Because a common complaint with Lovecraft is he's quite difficult to read.
I think what we're seeing now is more a reclaiming of Lovecraft, because if we look at the man himself, HPL, he was racist, he was misogynist, he, even by the standards of his time, he held some vile and bigoted views. Yeah. And what I do love is the move that we're seeing now towards reclaiming Lovecraftian and weird fiction by women, by LGBTQ people, by people of colour, the sort of the writing into it. So you've got like Victor Laval, you've got, say, Hailey Piper, you've got, perhaps not quite so directly Lovecraft, you've got Alison Rumfitt, you've got, I cannot remember. There was this great recasting of Innsmouth as being part of the Japanese-American internment during World War II.
Oh, yeah.
Emrys.
Yeah.
Ruth Anna Emrys, wasn't it?
Emrys.
Ruth Anna Emrys.
Ruth Anna Emrys, thank you. So I think what's driving new interest in Lovecraft is this process of reclaiming and remaking, because it's this idea that cosmicism and the cosmic and the horror are all baked in. We can just almost pick and mix what of the rest of it we take. And I'm personally quite enthused about taking all the old stories out of the drawer, giving them a bit of a shake and holding them up to the light. And I think that's what's happening, and that's what's driving new interest.
Yeah, I think one of the best examples you mentioned there was Victor Laval's Ballad of Black Tom, because I when I got that, I read it as standalone and it was tremendous. But then I read it back to back with The Horror of Red Hook, and it dovetails so neatly into it. And it basically makes what was one of Lovecraft's lesser stories and one of his more abhorrent in terms of his racial things. It makes it a complete piece now. If you add that, I don't think I could read it on its own without reading The Ballad of Black Tom. Yeah.
And you do have obviously longer running series, like you've got Charles Stross's Laundry Files and things like that. You've got a sort of welcome injection, I think, of humour into the canon, because Lovecraft can certainly be accused of being quite po-faced at times.
That's my thing. Is injecting humor into it. All mine's quite, my stuff's always kind of described as Monty Python meets H.P. Lovecraft or Carry On Films meet H.P. Lovecraft. And, because I find that mixture of horror and humor works really well, especially for the reader, because you can really wrong foot them, have them giggling 1 minute, then go, "Gah!" what the hell just happened the next? It works kind of well, and that's something Charles Stross did tremendously, I think, in the Laundry Files series.
Yeah, I mean, one of my comps or back of cover blurbs for Jamie Hallow and the End of the World was H.P. Lovecraft meets Mean Girls.
Nice. Oh, I do like a mashup.
Everyone's always wanted to read that, right? On Wednesdays they were picked.
Point it in my Amazon basket.
Thank you.
This is the beauty of cosmic horror in general, and the mythos in particular, is that you can put it in any situation, right? Because it's an underlying, we could almost say, part of the human condition, perhaps, our place in the cosmos. But it is interesting to see how perhaps at one time it did start getting a bit stereotyped. Maybe with the Derlethian, you've inherited your uncle's house, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You're a rich author who into, a much wider range of protagonists.
Yeah. I certainly remember reading a lot of works along those lines in the 90s. Not to give many shade, I think there was definitely a market for it. But what always really intrigued me back then was how, say, Ramsey Campbell managed to take the mythos and make it really peculiarly British in its setting.
Yeah.
Sort of like the dirty bookshop at the end of the street or bus stop or all these very quotidian settings. And I thought, well, if he can take it and make it British, anyone could take it and make it anything. And I guess that comes back down to what I was saying about how malleable Lovecraft's works actually are.
Yeah.
And we always like the Michael Shea stories as well, set in a very seedy Hollywood and LA, far removed from the sort of ivory towers of New England and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting things I read in recent years, it was a book, it's by a Chinese author who's under a pseudonym. And it was like online fiction, but this editor had sort of picked up on it and released it over here. There's like it's like a collection of short stories. It's called The Flock of Ba Hui, and it's really different because it's a very sort of Chinese take on cosmic horror, on Lovecraft, and it's really interesting. I thought it was absolutely fascinating, really well written. So yeah, that's something to check out.
Well, I think that's something we're seeing as well with the Japanese interest in Lovecraft and all these things. So it's a widening of different cultural things.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you look at anything that Junji Ito puts out. I mean, you cannot really get more Lovecraftian than Uzumaki, can you? Really, the sort of idea of a meme or a concept embedding itself in the fabric of reality and then tearing apart anyone that dares to look at it too long. I mean, that's cosmic, baby.
Junji Ito's work is absolutely tremendous. I'm a huge fan of it. Asamatsu Ken as well is an incredibly good author of Japanese Lovecraftian horror. Though I don't think any of his stuff's been adapted into manga. It's a real shame. If it is, listeners, and I don't know about it, please let me know, because I'd love to see that.
Also on the sort of Lovecraft for a younger generation point, one of my favourite shows growing up, because I grew up in the 90s, was Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Big surprise. But the Netflix reboot, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, is absolutely gorgeous. But not many people know that the fourth season is entirely about defending the Earth from what they call the Eldritch Terrors.
Oh, yeah.
And it is explicitly Lovecraftian. The main baddie is called Father Blackwood. It's very much to do with Lovecraft, the Eldritch. You've got little pastiches of all sorts of small Lovecraft stories and references in there. And I think that was great because it just took that young adult setting and went, hey, do you know what we can reboot in here? So I think I'd be really happy if I found that people had come into Lovecraft, the mythos and things like that from having watched the Eldritch Terrors season, because it was incredible. It really was.
It was great. I wasn't expecting it either, because all the rest of the seasons leading up to it they'd kind of been whispers and mentions and little Easter eggs, but I thought there were nothing more than that, because it was mostly about the relationship with Lucifer and all this kind of stuff, right? So when it sort of kicked in, I was kind of like, hang on a minute, this is my jam. This is great.
Yeah, that show has always known what it's doing. Right from the outset, that you've got a teacher called Shirley Jackson.
Yeah,
it knows what it's doing. It knows how to put in the work. But like you say, it does come it takes a strange turn, because season 1, witches; season 2, Lucifer; season 3, pagans and the Green Man, and there's quite a lot of sort of cosmic horror in that as well. And then season 4 is Lovecraft.
Yeah. I think the most surprising thing I found was Scooby-Doo. The rebooted Scooby-Doo that happened. I can't remember what it was. It must have been about a decade ago, something like that. But yeah, there were several episodes of that which dealt with cosmic horror. and specifically H.P. Lovecraft, Lovecraftian creatures and entities. I'm like, Scooby-Doo. This is great.
It's seeping into the collective unconscious. That's what it, or seeping out. I'm not sure which.
Yeah.
So adaptations, both of the Polar books, very cinematic. Any hint of adaptations or of Amazon been on the phone or anything like that?
I wish. I wish. It's sort of, I think, my curse to write, as you say, cinematic stuff that plays out on a very large scale with settings that would be hugely expensive to realise. The novel I've got coming out in February 2027, so my next one, is set in the Amazon rainforest in 1901. So,
nice.
I'm pitching that one as Rebecca Meets the Ruins.
Lovely.
I haven't lost my ability to pick a setting that is functionally unfilmable unless it's a massive. My agent loves me.
You need 2 people in a room. That's it. That's the novel.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Rebecca Meets the Ruins. I love it.
I know. I don't think that sentence has ever been said by anyone before. So I was like, oh, I'm having that.
Nice.
It's the boring question that every writer gets asked, right? But how do you coalesce your ideas? Is it like you mentioned with Jamie Hallow? You get a line and you think, or is it a mixture of things?
So one of the things, because I've started doing a lot of creative writing teaching recently, and the best thing I've heard comes from a writer called Kirsty Logan, which is the idea that a novel can be a spark or a cauldron. If it's a spark, it is like that one clear image or that one line coming to you. And that most often happens to me with novellas and short stories. With novels, because I know I'm going to be spending so long in that world and doing so much research, it's got to be a cauldron. I've got to throw things in, take things out, add, taste, take a little bit more out, put a little bit more in, etc. Because otherwise I feel that it won't come out with the sort of depth of flavour I want. So that's the difference. Spark for shorter work, for sure, but definitely cauldron for everything else. I typically have a list of things, ideas, settings, people that I want to write about, and I sort of shuffle them around until I got what I think is a killer combination.
So you're doing lots of research on the Amazon at the moment, then I take it. Have you scheduled a visit at all?
Oh, no. I'm strictly an armchair traveller when it comes to these things. I haven't been to the Antarctic or the Arctic for that matter. My 4th book does take place partially in the Himalayas, where I have been. And that is such a departure for me that I'm not quite sure how I'm going to handle it.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you about that, whether you'd ever been to these places, because I saw in your bio that you said that you get seasick and you don't like the cold. So,
absolutely.
So do you think choosing these things is kind of like vicarious living? Like,
Kind of. I think it might be a preoccupation of writing what you're scared about, because if there's one thing I have, it is absolutely crippling seasonal affective disorder. And if London in December is far too dark and cold for me, think what the Antarctic would be like. So that's me definitely writing about something that I would never wish to experience.
I spent a few years living out in the Fens, and the summer was reasonably pleasant. But November through to February was just bleak. But I think there is something attractive about that, and there are certain places out in the Fens that I could go and visit and just sit there for a while, And I think maybe that is part of the attraction of that Arctic Antarctic horror again. The bleakness calls to us in some way.
Yeah, that remoteness. Yeah, because I had the same thing growing up in the Peak District. Just standing there in the middle of nowhere on the top of a hill, and it's just the world around you kind of thing. It's incredibly humbling, terrifying, and beautiful at the same time.
And maybe that's part of the appeal of Lovecraft in terms of that cosmicism. It's just the bleakness of the universe. We're going to go full Thomas Ligotti in a minute.
I was going to say, we're heading into Ligotti territory here.
It really overlaps. One of the reasons I think there's so much fertile overlap between cosmic horror and the Gothic is that both really play off the sense of the sublime, the wonder and awe tinged with terror of the natural world. So I think you can do a lot that's Gothic with cosmic horror and vice versa.
Yep.
Okay, so I can hear Mr. Sargent pulling up in his bus outside, skidding in the snow, or has he put his snow chains on, I wonder? So it's time for us to leave a chilly Innsmouth. Ally, of course, as a guest, gets to stay overnight in the Gilman Hotel.
Can't wait.
You're a hardened explorer. I'm sure you'll be fine.
Mate, I'm just going to put in my earplugs, go to sleep in my lovely jammies, in my tentacle jammies. I'm sure nothing weird will happen in the middle of the night. I'm sure I won't be woken up. There'll be no townsfolk. It'll be chill.
Brilliant, brilliant. We have to finish, of course, by, as we ask all our guests, favourite Lovecraft story and favourite author other than Lovecraft story.
Ooh, I think favourite Lovecraft story, it kind of has to be Mountains of Madness. I mean, you'd all be very, very surprised if I went for anything else. Favourite other than Lovecraft story? Gosh, do you include books or are we talking just short stories?
Oh, whatever. Yeah.
Books, well, it's going to have to be Dark Matter by Michelle Parver, the OG Arctic ghost story. It is perfect.
Brilliant.
Nice.
Ally, thanks for coming in. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
And, of course, you're going to be our guest and a panellist at the Innsmouth Literary Festival coming up in September. So folks can come along and see you there. They can presumably you'll be up for doing some sign-ins and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll be bringing along stocks of all my books, plus whatever cheeky extras I can come up with between now and then.
Nice.
I will just give you 2 words, and that's cross-stitch Cthulhu.
Oh, we like a bit of cross-stitch. Yes.
I bought a cross-stitch Cthulhu at the first Innsmouth Literary Festival, and I still haven't done it.
Well, mate, you're my target audience.
Yes. Oh, look at that. We're just seeing an example. That's marvelous.
You're seeing an example of some bookmarks in progress.
Oh, that's excellent.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, but we're very pleased that the traders we have are people who make their own things, you know, whether it's cross-stitch or artists or whatever it is. There's a lot of interesting things on sale. Things you probably won't see anywhere else, I would say.
Yeah.
That's the best.
Okay, thanks very much, Ally. We'll see you in September.
Thank you.
All right, so that's it for us today, folks, from unseasonably chilly Innsmouth. Thanks very much for joining us. We're going to be popping back in a couple of weeks, of course. What are we looking at next time, sir?
Next time is going to be our 7th delve. We said we'd be able to do it in 2. Our 7th delve into Lovecraft's sonnet cycle, Fungi from Yuggoth.
Yes, and I believe we're going to be looking at Azathoth and Nyarlathotep, aren't we? That's going to be a deep dive, that one.
Indeed, that's going to be one of those ones that sort of spreads its tentacles here, there, and everywhere, really, isn't it?
Yes. So keep an eye out for that. There's also just time to mention a great gaming event that's coming up in July. It's Continuum, which runs from the 25th to the 28th of July. It's 3 days of RPGs and other games. That's being held at the Cranfield Management Development Centre, which is the same venue that was used for the recent Chaosium Con, which was a great event. There's lots of stuff going on across the 3 days. I'm going to be there on Saturday, so I hope to see you there. And of course, I'll put the link to that in the show notes. Thanks again for joining us today. As always, of course, a big thanks to all our listeners and our patrons. If you'd like to join them and support the show, do check out our Patreon page. When you sign up, you get access to all our bonus content. You get free entry to the Innsmouth Literary Festival and your quarterly copy of Innsmouth News. The summer edition is just being prepared as we speak. And with that, it's a chilly goodbye from me, Rob Poynton.
And a positively frozen goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.